All right. Good afternoon, all, and welcome to this training session. Once again, I'd like to thank Research Commons and Brian for hosting me today. My presentation today is Introduction to the Heilmeier Catechism, which is a method that can be used to help prepare competitive and compelling proposals. My name is Kathy Hunt, and I'm a proposal development specialist with the Office of Foundation Relations here at OSU. I'm joined today by my colleague, Brianna Yock, who's a director within Foundation Relations. She'll be available to help answer any questions you have during the presentation. And as Brian mentioned, feel free to type them in as you think of them. Also, as mentioned by Brian, this presentation is recorded, so don't be concerned about writing everything down as you read the slides. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the Office of Foundation Relations. Briefly, Ohio State's Office of Foundation Relations is a central resource unit within university advancement. As part of advancement, our focus is on private foundations and managing the institutional relationship with private funders. The Foundation Relations team supports engagement with private foundations on behalf of the university, working with university leadership and faculty to build and strengthen mutually beneficial partnerships between private foundations who are exploring and making investments in Ohio State's education and research enterprises. Now on to the Heilmeier Catechism. I'll start off with a little introduction to George Heilmeier. Dr. Heilmeier received his PhDs in solid state materials and electronics, and he was a pioneering engineer in the field of LCDs. He served as the director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, from 1975 to 1977. In addition, due to his many contributions to science, he was the recipient of several different awards. So one of DARPA's operating principles is the idea of big risks equal big rewards. However, how do you decide whether a risk is worth taking? George Heilmeier developed a series of 9 questions, now known as a Heilmeier Catechism, to help DARPA officials evaluate proposed research programs and decide which ones they wanted to pursue. This same set of questions is also really helpful in creating strong proposals. Answering each of these questions can help you focus and organize your proposal. The first question of the Heilmeier Catechism is, what are you trying to do? In answering this question, you need to clearly state your project goals, trying to reduce the jargon you use as you explain it. By clearly stating what the problem is, reviewers will be able to easily identify the overall goal of your research. It's also critical that you make a distinction between your goal, which is a hypothesis or the hypotheses that you plan to test, and your objectives, which are the steps along the way to answering that hypothesis. The next question to answer is, how is it done today? And what are the limits of current practice? In terms of proposal sections, you can think of this kind of like a background and significance section. For this question, you should describe why improvements are needed to either the current system or its methods, and explain what might happen if nothing changes. In short, why is the status quo not sufficient anymore? Why is it critical that this problem be solved and solved right now? In answering this question, it's important to give a sense of urgency, but not that of doomsday. Third, ask, what is new in your approach, and why do you think your approach will be successful? In answering this, describe how your approach is superior to that of others. What does it do differently that no other approaches do? Why do you believe that your idea will work to solve the problem? You want to make it clear to reviewers why the funder should choose your approach in particular to solve this problem. You can focus on any innovative aspects about your proposed project as you answer this question. In answering this question, you can include any preliminary or pilot studies that you've conducted. What have you already tested and what have you discovered about this problem? Pilot data can help prove to reviewers that your methods will appropriately address the problem that you want to solve. The fourth question in the Heilmeier Catechism is simply, who cares? You need to explain how your research impacts more than just your own research group. In answering this question, Identify your stakeholders and explicitly state the groups that will benefit from your project. In describing them, you can include demographics like location, age, gender, or socioeconomic status to make clear you know who will benefit from your research. The next question to answer is, if you are successful, what difference will it make? You need to describe the impacts that your successful project will have on your research, on your discipline, as well as other related disciplines, on society in general, and for the foundation. It's especially important to consider the foundation in answering this question. You need to make sure that your work matches with the priorities identified by the funder, and then you want to clearly tell them how they will benefit. In answering how your project will change things, consider how your work may impact things such as add to current knowledge in the field, or solve a pressing problem in science or society, or how it will contribute to critical components of things like infrastructure or economic development. You'll also need to address the risks in your proposed work. You must be honest about any risks involved, but make sure that you use positive language in addressing them. You should emphasize how the rewards of the work will outweigh the risks involved in undertaking it. Describe how your proposed work addresses and mitigates any potential risks involved, and include any alternative plans should you come across a problem. This question is really important to consider, as funders need to be comfortable and confident that you can successfully overcome any potential issues that you may come across in your work. The seventh question is, how much will it cost? In this case, you need to consider all the cost, including financial, time, and resources. As you write your proposal, make sure you follow any budget limits set by the funding agency. And if no limits are set, you can try to set a realistic boundary. To do this, you can make estimates based on total funds available and estimated awards if this is posted in the request for proposals. You can also take a look at previously funded project award amounts. Often you can find this information on foundation websites. And if you can't, please feel free to contact us here at the Office of Foundation Relations, and we can see if we can help you get this information. You'll also want to answer the question, how long will it take? It's important to make sure that your proposed timeline matches the timeframe expectations set forth by the funder. I would recommend that you provide more than just a simple number such as it'll take 2 years to complete. Consider adding a narrative or some sort of figure that describes the timeline of your research in more detail. This can serve as a way to note when particular milestones of your research or project will occur. You also need to be realistic about what you can accomplish in the timeframe proposed. Don't overpromise what you can deliver in a particular length of time. Finally, ask yourself, what are the midterm and final exams to check for success? Clearly state how you will assess progress and determine the success of your project. How will you know when you have met your goals? How will you know when your project is completed? To do this, you'll need to identify appropriate metrics of success and determine how you will analyze your data. It might be helpful to describe any ways that you might make corrections during the experiment if something doesn't go exactly as planned. You need to have quantitative metrics and data in order to confidently determine what success means for your project. So, after answering these 9 questions, you should have the outline to a focused and competitive proposal. I'd like to remind you again, reviews value specific answers and writing without excessive jargon. They're looking for a clear, easy to read proposal. So once you've answered the Heilmeyer Catechism questions, it's time to use that information to draft your letter of intent and the full proposal. In many cases, the first thing that a private foundation asks for is a letter of intent or a letter of inquiry. This LOI is a vetting mechanism for the foundation to determine if they're interested in learning more about the project or the concept that you're pitching. It can help the foundation identify the proposals that are best suited to receive their grant that they're offering, and it can also weed out proposals it is not interested in. As the writer of the LOI, it is your goal to make it compelling so that you're invited to submit a full proposal to the foundation. The letter of intent is typically short, usually 1 to 3 pages, and it describes your proposed research and the alignment to the funder's priorities or the call for letter of intent. This will be the first impression the foundation has of you, and first impressions are really important. Foundations look for well-crafted and well-aligned letters of intent to invite to full application. As such, it's critical that you carefully read the call and precisely follow funder guidelines in developing your letter of intent. While each funder might have a different guideline for their letters of intent, this slide describes a general layout. Once again, always read and follow any funder instructions. I want to emphasize that while this is called a letter, it's typically not written in letter format. If your LOI is solicited, which means there's a specific request for proposals or call out there, this is essentially a concept paper or an executive summary. The only time this would be written as a true letter is if it is an unsolicited LOI. But for most of you, the majority of LOIs you'll be writing will probably be solicited from these specific RFPs. In your first paragraph of your LOI, you should lead with a hook. This will engage the reader's interest in the issue or the problem that you're addressing. Next, you should introduce yourself and identify the focus of your project. In the body paragraphs, clearly explain your project. Describe your research question and explain why answering it is critical. Provide a brief project description, including things like design, methodologies, and key personnel. You can state your expected outcomes and measurements of success here as well. If this is an unsolicited letter of intent, you might want to include your estimated project budget as well as the amount that you're requesting from the funder. As you end your letter of intent, you should restate the intent of your project as well as emphasize how it fits within the foundation you're writing to. To do this, you should reaffirm your alignment to the funder's priority areas. And finally, in the case of an unsolicited letter of intent, you would want to thank the foundation for its consideration of your request. If your LOI is favorably received, you'll be invited to submit a full proposal. Now, in some cases, there are no LOIs and you would move immediately to full proposal. In either way, each foundation will have distinct guidelines for what they want in a full proposal, but there are some sections that are typically found in most applications. And I'll discuss most of these sections in the following slides. I know I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Remember to read the application guidelines before you start writing. Not following guidelines can result in your proposal being disqualified during administrative review. This means it won't even make it to the reviewers if it's disqualified right now. Usually the first part of a proposal is your summary or your abstract, typically a page or less. It's a short section that summarizes your proposed work. Here, you'll provide an overview of the problem, you'll describe the critical need or the knowledge gap, your research objectives, and how your proposed work is innovative. You should discuss the intellectual merit of the work by describing the current state of the knowledge of the area, and also how your work would change or advance the discipline. Finally, describe the broader impacts of the work. How will it benefit the foundation as well as society in general? You can also include any impacts to underserved communities or communities that a foundation has deemed a priority. Next, you'll have a statement of need, where you explain why it's important to address this problem. In writing this statement, you should clearly describe why both you, the applicant, and the funder should care about this issue. Describe the problem and the people who will benefit. It's helpful to include supporting facts and evidence to add weight to your argument. And as I mentioned earlier, this statement of need needs to be compelling, but be careful about stating urgency versus painting that grim picture. Most proposals will have a background and significance section where you'll lay out the rationale for your proposed research. In this section, you will describe the current state of the field and how you're going to advance it. You can describe the importance of the problem you'd like to solve, or what knowledge gaps remain, or what the critical barriers to progress are. You should also include how the proposed work builds on the work that's already been done. It's important to avoid making this a literature review. Reviewers aren't interested in learning about the whole history of your field. However, do include your own relevant research to show that you're contributing already to advancing discovery in this particular area. In the research aims section, you'll explain what you plan on testing. Aims are typically related, but not dependent on each other. This is because if they were completely dependent on each other, if aim 1 failed, you wouldn't be able to continue with other aims. Basically, your proposed project would fail entirely if all aims were completely related and one failed. Your research aims will state your experimental approach and should describe how accomplishing them will aid in answering your overall goal. Aims should focus on the outcomes of your work, not the process. This means that you should use measurable terms when writing your aims. For example, you can use words like identify or characterize or determine. You should justify your aims and briefly describe the benefits of each research outcome. Finally, avoid making overly ambitious aims. To do this, you need to keep your budget, your resources, and your timeline in mind. If you have really preliminary data, it's really great if you can include it into your proposal. Pilot studies show that you both have expertise in the area and early evidence to support your research objectives. They also support your proposed plan by demonstrating the work is feasible and it can generate the data needed to answer the research question. If you have it, you should include key data or statistics for your research aims. Now, sometimes this section could be incorporated within each aim section, so just read the application guidelines to determine where this is appropriate to put. The research plan and methodology section is the core of your proposal. Here, you can describe the techniques and the analyses that you plan to use for your research. In writing this section, make sure that you consider what your selection criteria for subjects and research would be, what your sample size is, and why you plan on using this. You can consider factors like time and cost, as well as statistical power. You should include the treatments or the interventions that you plan to test, as well as your intended methods of data collection and how you plan to interpret results. Remember, this section will be guided by your research hypotheses. So as you write it, make sure that your methods directly answer the questions that you pose. Finally, your proposal will need a budget section that explains the cost of your research efforts. This typically includes a budget sheet, as well as line item descriptions of what is on the budget. It should be clear and concise, justifying the use of funds you're asking for. Budget estimates should be as accurate as possible, as reviewers will be concerned by either over or underestimations. Some example of line items include things like personnel, equipment, supplies, travel, publication costs, and indirect costs. You should read application guidelines to see what the funder allows and does not allow on budgets. For example, you can check for limits to indirect costs or whether they allow items like salary, equipment, or travel costs to be included in their budget. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope that this information will be helpful to you as you write your proposals. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now or contact me or the rest of our team at Foundation Relations at any point. If you have a specific question regarding private foundations for a discipline or a research area, I encourage you to reach out to the appropriate contact, which you can either find on the slide or on the website that we have listed above as well. Once again, thanks to Research Commons for hosting, and please let me know if you have any questions.